Greetings from Kenwell. Today is Saturday, July 18th, 2026. This is my fourth version of this video due to screw-ups that I had made. Last week, we left off with Ruth asking Boaz to marry her at the threshing floor. Boaz is thrilled that Ruth has asked him to marry her, as so wonderfully stated in Ruth 3:10-11. May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. I am sure that Ruth is thrilled beyond belief from what Boaz has just said to her. But now comes the but. Listen to Ruth 3 verse 12. And now it is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. This shocks the heck out of Ruth. Here she is expecting to marry Boaz, but according to the law of Israel, Boaz is expected to obey the law. And if this nearer kinsman agrees to redeem the land, and with it Ruth, she will be out of Boaz's life forever. Before Ruth goes back to Naomi, Boaz reassures Ruth that he will do everything he can for her. Then Boaz tells her another but. Boaz says, I will try my best, but if this nearer redeemer agrees to redeem you, there is nothing that I can do for you. In other words, I will try my best for you, Ruth, but if the nearer kinsman accepts you, it was nice knowing you. Boaz was an honorable man, and in his heart, he knew that he had to do the right thing. He was rich, and he could have just married Ruth, but the right thing is to give the nearer redeemer first consideration. This principle applies to every one of us. In life, in everything we do, we should do the right thing. Think about that. Now, Ruth is at home with Naomi, and she has to wait to see how all this pans out. Now, I ask you, have you ever had a time in your life when you've had to wait to find out the outcome of something? This just happened to me last month. I had a CT scan done, and then 2 days later, I got a call from the doctor stating that the CT scan showed extra lymph nodes in my stomach, which could be a sign of stomach cancer. This was the same amount of shock that Ruth received when she found out that there was a nearer redeemer. Then 2 weeks later for myself, I got an endoscopy done. That's a procedure where they shove a probe down your throat and into your stomach. Well, I wake up from the procedure and the doctor greets me and says, everything is normal. Praise the Lord for that. For Ruth, all she can wait and see what happens. Let's look at Ruth chapter 4 together. Verse 1 says, Now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there. And behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, Turn aside, friend. Sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down. The city gate in ancient Israel was an outdoor courthouse. If you wanted a legal decision that would stick, you went to the gate where the elder sat and everyone could see. It is interesting to note that what began in darkness at midnight on the threshing floor, Boaz now finishes in broad daylight in the most public place in Bethlehem. And look at that little word, behold. Of all the mornings, of all the men in Bethlehem, here comes a nearer redeemer strolling past the gate at the exact right moment. This is another perfect example of divine providence, as God made sure that the nearer redeemer would come by the gate. Now here's a detail I just love. When Boaz calls the man over, our English Bible says something like, turn aside, friend. But in the Hebrew, Boaz calls him Poloni, Amoni. The best translation we have is something like Mr. So-and-so. The prophet Samuel who wrote the book of Ruth, deliberately refused to record this man's name. And there's a big reason for this. Everyone knew his name there, but Samuel calls him Poloni Almoni because in Deuteronomy 25, it says that if a man refuses to do the right thing of protecting the family name, that his name will not be remembered in Israel. I hope you find that interesting. Boaz then gathers 10 elders, and now court is in session. And by the way, notice that Boaz simply tells the elders, sit down here, and they sit. This shows us what kind of standing Boaz had in that town. 10 elders don't take a seat for a nobody. Then Boaz says to the Redeemer, Naomi is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech, and you are first in line to redeem it. And if you redeem it, redeem it. If not, tell me, because I will then redeem it. Mr. So-and-so then says, I will redeem it. Boaz, in his mind, says, oh, crap. And this is definitely not what he had hoped for. But Boaz had plan B, which he states in verse 5. The day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth, the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. In other words, as I said a couple of weeks ago, buy the land, get the girl. And now the math changes for Mr. So-and-so. Verse 6, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Land alone was an investment. Land plus Ruth was in his ledger a losing situation. In an article I read from scholars Odo and Ugwu, they make the point that if this fellow had no son of his own yet, his firstborn son with Ruth would have counted to Elimelech's line, not his. So Mr. So-and-so continues to say in verse 6, take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it. And now something really neat happens. Look at verse 7. Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm anything, one man took off his sandal and gave it to the other. And this was a confirmation in Israel. Notice Samuel has to explain the custom, as he says, in former times, which tells us that even his first readers found it old-fashioned. Now this is from the ceremony from Deuteronomy 25 that I walked you through a few weeks ago, which is called the halitzah, where the widow yanks off the sandal and spits in the man's face. It's related, but it's not the same. This man wasn't a brother of the dead, so there's no disgrace ceremony, no spitting at the gate of Bethlehem. He voluntarily removes his own sandal to seal the transfer. And what did the sandal mean? In that world, to walk on land was to claim it. This is said to Joshua by God in Joshua 1 verse 3. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given to you, just as I promised to Moses. So handing over the sandal said, the right to walk this land as Redeemer, I hand it over to you. No lawyers, no papers, no ink. One sandal, 10 elders, done forever. Here is one thing that I want you to remember about this. The Redeemer kept his inheritance and lost his name. He was so worried about ruining his estate that he refused to raise up the name of the dead. The Redeemer's name is never to be remembered, but 3,000 years later, Boaz, who cheerfully paid a cost he never legally owed, is still remembered. Not only that, but this is exactly what the Hebrew word hesed means. Kindness that goes beyond the call of duty. Boaz's name is honored all the way into Matthew chapter 1 in the family line of Jesus Christ himself. May the good Lord be with you until we meet again next week.